So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us and welcome to the Sustainable Futures seminar series. So I'm Kate Scott at the University of Manchester. I'm based in the geography department here, and I am also the net zero lead for what is a relatively new platform at the University of Manchester, where we're working through sustainable solutions that address global environmental problems, but with a strong sort of recognition and understanding of the social, the societal and economic systems underpinning this. So today we have two presentations to look forward to. The first will be from Richard Kingston, who's a professor in urban planning and geographical information systems. And he's going to be talking to us about Nerc's 5-year digital solutions programme, which he's leading, which is, I don't want to spoil it too much, but an online platform that's used to exploit and use data that's been generated and thinking about how we can best use that to improve or generate benefits in society and the environment and the economy and so forth. So we'll hear from him first, then we'll be hearing from Joe Ravetz, who also sits in planning and environmental management at the University of Manchester here. And he's going to be talking about the Climate-Wise Toolkit, which is designed to turn ambitious climate targets into action. So thinking of how we deliver on those targets. So yeah, so each will have about 25 minutes to talk or present, and then we'll have about 10 minutes time for questions. Can you please write your questions in the chat function? Feel free to write as the presenters are talking. Feel free to put any comments in there and respond to comments so we can create a bit of a dialogue there. And I will come to those after each presentation. So also, I do want to say it looks like we've got quite a variety of people in the audience, partly from the university, but also from NGOs, from some businesses, from the public sector. So we should have quite an interesting session today. So Richard, I'm going to hand over to you first. So yeah, I think you've got some slides and yeah, you've got about 25 minutes and then we'll take some questions. So the floor is over to you.
Thank you, Kate. I hope everyone can hear me and can see my little face somewhere in the corner of the screen. Right, so I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you this afternoon about the Nerc Digital Solutions Programme and about what we are building. We're building this, basically this digital solutions hub. So as Kate said, I'm a town planner by training, but have always had an interest in the role of data and particularly spatial data to support decision making, whether that's right down at a very local community level up to citywide level, regional, national and even EU level. I've worked on in the past on climate change projects, developing decision support systems around climate change. With other colleagues here at the university and across Europe. So this afternoon, what I want to talk to you about is, well, just start off by outlining what we're doing. So why are we building a digital solutions hub? Where's this kind of come from? How have we managed to convince Nerc to give us just around £7 million to build this? Explain a little bit about the approach that we are taking. And then focus particularly on a user-centric digital solution, as I would sort of call it. And this is partly why we won this bid. I'm not sure who else we were competing against, but we do know we were competing against other academic institutions. And we've put like the user at the heart of what we're developing. And then I'll talk a little bit about next steps. So we're only a few months into this piece of work, and we want to get as many of you, hopefully in the audience, engaged in this over the next few years. And at the end, there'll be a chance to ask some questions. So just remind everyone, you know, this is funded by Nerc. Nerc collect a heck of a lot of data, whether it's from their aeroplane, as you can see there on the right, whether it's from environmental sensors or predominantly from academic researchers who run Nerc funded research projects that do a lot of data collection. And as part of that, they're obliged to put that data into one of Nerc's 5 data centers. And the second photograph down there on the right, that blue sort of picture, is Nerc's supercomputer in Harwell called Jasmine, one of the most powerful computers we've got in the country, and a lot of data that Nerc holds. Most about 11 petabytes of data sit on that. So we go from kind of the primary data collection to storing and saving that on this computer. Then people have to kind of write code to potentially interrogate and analyze that data to support some kind of research that they might be doing. So why are we building this digital solutions hub? So this is part of, it's a whole program, but it's a bit different to other research council type programs where normally there's a research program and there's multiple projects sit underneath that program. Often, you know, at other universities. With this particular investment from Nerc, the digital solutions program is entirely hosted at the University of Manchester. They wanted to have this run from within one single institution, because it's not like a normal sort of research project. So I've not got an aim and a set of objectives and some research questions. We're actually building a physical, well, a digital, but it does include physical infrastructure, a system to support, as Nerc call it, service innovation. So the primary objective of this program is to support what we call service innovation. So it's taken over 2 years to get to this point. So some of you may have even remembered in November 2019, we're talking pre-COVID, Nerc put out a call for the digital solutions program. We got through several rounds of interviews for that, and then we had a small amount of money, £20,000 for a 9-month scoping phase. So that was kind of the 3/4, overall it is 5 years, but the 3/4 of that first part, 3/4 of a year, was doing this scoping phase, talking to the Environmental Data Service, talking to all different types of partners to help develop the full proposal, which we then submitted again. So we actually started this last October. We're in the process of appointing lots of people. I'll say a bit about later. And at the heart of this is Nerc's Environmental Data Service. So Nerc have these 5 data centres distributed across the UK, based in different universities. And the Environmental Data Service kind of sits on top of this and curates and manages through this data policy all of their data. So the Environmental Data Service, through its data policy, is a strong commitment to professionally managing all of this data for the long term. It's hosted on through these various centres. And a key aim of what the Environmental Data Centre is about is making that data accessible for supporting current scientific work, but also storing it for future reuse. So you could potentially be doing things like time series. Well, people do time series analysis. So Nerc, yeah, I sometimes get sort of people listening, you've been a bit critical here of the environmental data services and centres, and it's not what this is about. So they're doing an excellent job in terms of curating and maintaining this kind of roughly about 11 petabytes of data at the moment. And they provide an exceptionally high quality of service to enable access and use of that data. The different centres build analytical tools. So there's one, for example, up at Lancaster called Data Labs. Data Labs are analytical tools that sit on top of things like Jasmine to allow you to do analysis on that data that then can be used as part of your high quality research if you're an academic. And other groups will bid to Nerc for funding to sometimes build these analytical tools to help them support their research. Anyone who's seen me speak before will always know I like to put a big but in my presentation, because I'm sort of here to sort of disrupt things slightly and go, well, yeah, okay, that's great. But Nerc kind of went, hold on a minute, are we making the best use of all of this data? So the digital solutions program and what we're actually doing has at the core of it a focus to work. So this is what makes it different. The core focus of what we're doing is to work closely with stakers across the non-academic community. Now, this is quite unique. This is not really done before. I know, you know, if you're based in a university or here at Manchester, you have to write your impact statement when you're bidding for funding about how your research is going to lead to wider impact outside of academia. But normally that's sort of what you're doing at the end. You're doing your research to have academic impact and maybe, you know, push the frontiers of science, but also you're trying to maybe influence government policy or maybe how a local authority thinks about making decisions. The difference with this is that we're putting those non-academic stakeholders at the heart of what we're actually doing. So Nerc realised, going back 3-4 years, that they've got a heck of a lot of data, got a heck of a lot of expertise within their environmental data service, But all this data has huge potential value that goes wider than just the current user community. So it's a much wider community of potential users out there. That can be, we're talking here mainly from a UK perspective at the moment, but that can be from national government, the devolved nations, local, and who knows if we ever get regional government back, so that, but sort of below, sub-national level, so local, regional government, all the different quangos and agencies, so the potential, so the environment agencies to some extent use and collaborate on a lot of projects with Nerc, and you may well have them as partners. Some of the organisations I'm going to mention are probably partners in your project. So a whole range of them. We've got the health and safety executive involved. They're really interested in things like how can they merge, the health and safety executive have a lot of data. How could they merge their data with Nerc data to say, for example, understand the implications of an oil tanker crashing on a motorway, and if that spills all its diesel or its oil across the motorway, where does that seep into the watercourse? Could they analyse and monitor that in near real time to understand the environmental impacts of that kind of accident happening? We've got things like natural resources, Wales and the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, lots of agencies as potential users, but also as data providers. We've got health agencies, NHS, across all nations involved, NHS Digital, and things like, so I was met yesterday with a group called Health Data Research UK, that's Medical Research Council funded, and we were talking about how medicine is moving to a more holistic view of medical interventions. We've heard a lot during the pandemic about the quality of, the importance of access to good quality green space during the pandemic, but even beyond, before and beyond the pandemic. There's a recognition that, access to good quality green space, clean air is very good for health. So it's connecting up these different things, looking at life chances of people, focus on, elderly people and their activities and things. So we're talking about how we can be working with the Medical Research Council and HDR UK to link together all of this disparate data. Also talking and working with third sector organisations who could really benefit from better access to a lot of this kind of environmental data, so Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, etc., on a national level to sort of help support the kind of campaigning they do. Lots of local environmental organisations that could really benefit from a lot of this data that Nerc hold as well. And also the private sector, again, which offers some interesting challenges. So from SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, right up to national and international organisations. And for all of these, what we've got is the data, but also, if you remember, I showed you that photograph of Jasmine, the supercomputer down in Harwell. It's not just about accessing data, it's also about giving access to that computing resource that sits in the background, that is traditionally something that just academics would have used. So, as I said, we're working with lots of partners. This is a growing list. This is not all of them. I could have made maybe the icons a bit smaller and fitted them all on. Excuse me, but it's a growing list. And you might be out there looking at that and think, well, why not on there? Well, you're more than welcome to join. And I'll say a little bit more about that at the moment. But what's really important to recognise here as well is that this is not just focused on one particular part of the UK. It's not just a sort of Greater Manchester project. This is across the whole of the UK, from neighbourhood level right up to national, across 4 nations. So we're working with all these different organisations that we've been talking to during our scoping phase. Some of these organisations are providers of data, and others are just users of data, organisations that will benefit from integrating all of this data together on this digital hub that we are building. So what approach are we taking? Well, we've kind of got 2 things really. The first one is to make better use of the data. So putting Nerc's data at the heart of our work. And importantly, so when the original call came out from Nerc a few years ago, it was very clear about this was not just about Nerc's data, and not just about making Nerc's data more usable and accessible to the non-academic community. It was about connecting Nerc's data with social, economic, health and other environmental data across the whole of the UK. So whilst we've got those 5 data centres that curate and create their own data in their own right, taking all of that data but connecting it with things like census data from the Office for National Statistics, all of the health data that the NHS hold across all 4 nations, other environmental data from things like the Environment Agency, DEFRA, SEPA, and other organisations as well, as I've just shown on that slide, got the sort of Ordnance Survey, Health and Safety Executive, the Government Actuaries Department. They're really interested in how can you assess the impacts of, say, climate change on the public estate. So we've been talking to the Government Actuaries Department, who are trying to put a value, how do you value the cost of a school flooding and the cost that would lead in terms of repairs. So we're doing lots of work in the Upper Calder, I think, around Hebden Bridge area, which has been flooding a lot over the last few years. And they've been tasked with trying to come up with some kind of economic model that allows them, excuse me, to understand how much it would cost. So what value do you put on a primary school, and what costs will there be? So for insurance purposes. So there's a whole range of organisations out there that can be benefiting from a lot of the data that Nerc holds. So it's all about making Nerc's data more discoverable to the non-academic user. Now, this isn't to say that what we're doing isn't to be of benefit to academics, because what we do know is that most of the users of Nerc's data at the moment tend to be environmental scientists. As someone who's a specialist in GIS, I kind of play around with some of the data that Nerc hold, and even I must admit, I find it quite difficult, some of that data, to actually extract from the services that they provide at the moment. But it does have great value. It can be used by epidemiologists, it can be used by geographers, it can be used people in the humanities. It's not just for people in sort of environmental science or chemists or experts in atmospheric pollution. There's a wide range of within academia that could be making better use of this data. But primarily what we're concerned with is that non-academic user. So as well as making that data more accessible, I mean, it is accessible, but mainly for academic communities, some of the data you need to be kind of have a .ac.uk email address to register. You can't always access all of the data, so we have to be thinking about how that's going to be opened up to non-academic users, but also thinking, well, why would people want to use this data? So it's not just about providing access to the data, it's also about as a gateway to a set of user-friendly sort of digital toolkits. So the hub, which will sit over the top of this data, is going to allow access to that data, but a whole set of tools. So you'll be able to search for the data, discover that data. As we build the system, it will start to learn from what people are searching for, what they're using it for, so that as other users come online to use it, they'll be able to see that another organisation that might be similar to theirs used it for certain things, and they could reuse what people have done. We're also developing new tools which will be co-created with users. So we're going to be asking through a lot of workshops, how can we support your decision making? What do you want this thing to do? So we've not approached this from a point of view of saying, right, there's all this data, we're going to build these tools and then go out there and say to everyone, right, look at what we've done. We've spent all this money, we've built this amazing thing. Why don't you use it? Because we know from our research, it doesn't work that way around. You've got to start with the users. So we're asking questions about how, basically, how can this help you do your job? So it's key, really, that it is not just a data portal. It's not a £7 million portal to lots of data. But whilst we realise we can't do absolutely everything, so what we started off with are 2 main, what we call use cases. So the one is called a climate ready nation, and another one called a connected health nation. These are building on work we've already done. There's just a few examples on here, work that we've already done here in Manchester. So myself and Sarah Lindley, who's one of the co-Is, developed the climate just mapping tool across the whole of the UK. We'll be adding that on there, but adding new data and more up-to-date data. Dave Topping and James Evans here at the university run the Urban Observatory, and that'll be getting integrated into what we're doing. And then my colleagues, John Ainsworth and Caroline Jay, who've developed something called Britain Breathing and Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. have got these kind of health apps that have been developed. So we've already got a kind of track record of kind of building these things, but we're going to be scaling those up. And as I said, key to this is putting users at the center of the hub's development. So we haven't got a preconceived idea yet of exactly what this hub will be. We'll be running workshops and going out and asking you, the future potential users of this, what you want this thing to do. So we'll be basically working with and connecting a range of users and their data as well, because some of these users are, as I said, data providers as well. So things like DEFRA, Environment Agency, NHS already are huge holders of data. And to do that, we know that, as I said earlier, you shouldn't just go off and build your tool and then come on back and go, here, look what we've done. So we're employing lots of software engineers, and we'll be embedding those software engineers in these partner organisations, and equally, they will be able to come to Manchester and work closely with us, along with the Nerc data centre staff as well, in a really collaborative environment as we start to build this tool. So we've got lots of things feeding into this. This is sort of just a diagram really to show you how, having use cases at the heart. We've got different types of users who will access this system. We've got lots of data coming in, and Jasmine, which will allow you to run. So it's not, as I said, not just a portal onto data, allow users to run computationally intensive analysis. So it could be you're running a epidemiological model to assess the relationship between air pollution and respiratory illness. And you might, rather than just doing that at a local level, you'd be able to do that across the whole country in one go. Things that might take several hours or days to run on a desktop PC will take seconds to run on Jasmine. And allowing users to do things like what-if modelling. So what if I want to build 3,000 houses in this particular area? What would be the implications for surface water runoff, ground stability? I'll be able to run and model that kind of thing. You can use other people's models. You might have your own models if you're more technically adept at running those. And over time, this will evolve into what's called a UK research and innovation national facility. So this isn't something that will disappear at the end of 4 years, at the end of funding, although we'll have to apply for more funding. We will become a permanent kind of fixture on the UKRI landscape. We've got a work package looking at business models, because obviously if we're going to start allowing non-academic users of this system, we need to think about how people pay for that. Is it provided as a service for the public sector because of through general taxation, or do people pay for this, and particularly in terms of how do the private sector make use of it, particularly when they'll have access to Jasmine's resources sat in the background of all this. I won't dwell on this too long, but this just kind of shows you, for those who are interested, when you've got quite a big budget, that you can have a pretty big team. We're appointing, so the people in the dark sort of red colour are our research software engineers. We've got some of those appointed just very recently. We've got some infrastructure engineers to appoint in about a year's time. We've so far appointed 2 postdocs to help with user needs, and we've got several more of those to be appointed later. And we're also working, so although I said this was a Manchester project, we're also working with these 7 external partners. It was a requirement of the grant that a certain amount of the funding had to be spent outside of Manchester. So Software Sustainability Institute helping us with making sure the code is robust, the computer code that we write for writing this whole system. Urban Observatory, who do a lot in Newcastle, doing a lot of near real-time analysis. We've got the Connected Places Catapult helping us out with business, understanding the business case for use and costing of this tool. So quite a mixed use, and obviously at the bottom as well, we've got all the Nerc environmental data service partners as well involved. So in terms of next steps, and this is where you can get yourselves involved. So from April onwards, after the Easter, we'll be starting our user needs workshops across the UK in different regions and nations. So if this is something you're interested in, you're an organisation or even an individual that's interested in how you could help us with this, we'll be running workshops. You can help us build this and help solve your kind of business day-to-day decision-making requirements, to help us develop the use cases. We've got more staff to appoint. This is just a plea. If you're a project manager and looking for a new challenge, we're looking for a project manager. We will get to go into this nice new shiny building just off Oxford Road. So there's the carrot. We're working on getting the bean bags and the pinball machines and the pool tables to make it feel like Google. And yeah, I guess I will summarize now because I realize this clock is ticking. But the key thing really, I suppose this is a plea really, if you're part of, if you want to get involved in this, please do get in touch. If you want to be involved in those user engagement workshops, they'll be going on all around the UK in a hybrid manner, as is the way these days. So whether you're local, national, small, medium, large, or international, everyone is welcome. And yeah, as I said, if you want to be our project manager, we'll be advertising that shortly, but happy to chat with anyone. Not here, I don't think that's the right place for that, but happy to chat to anyone who might be interested in, if you've got expertise in project management, to come and work with us for the next 4 years. But I think, Kate, I will stop there because I keep seeing my computer clock ticking away.
Well, I make it that you've got 2 minutes left. So.
Well, that's perfect.
Perfect timing. So yeah, thanks, Richard. It's been really nice to get this presentation at the start of the project to give us an overview of what's to come and how to get involved. We've got a couple of questions I'll put to you from the audience, and yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, please start typing them in as I ask this. So Chris McLean from Manchester University, you've answered some of these. He says it looks like it's a really interesting project. How are you planning to engage with users and citizens to design the hub? And I guess that comes in part with your user workshops that you've been talking about upcoming. Yeah,
so we have a tender out at the moment. Another bit of the requirement of the grant was that some money had to go out to competitive tender for to engage a kind of professional company to help run and manage our user engagement workshops. So they will be some will be targeted at particular sectors. So like government agencies. We'll be targeted through one set of workshops. We'll have other workshops that are more about community organisations and charities. Another one that might be more aimed at local authorities through local government association, and they will be run geographically as well.
So by stakeholder and geography, but topic-wise or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. Well, yeah, we'll have a focus on not necessarily, because this is sort of cross-cutting, so we don't want to kind of get into a silo of this is just about, river flooding, and we only want stakeholders to come along who are interested in that. It's more because the key to this is about that cross-cutting and integrative nature of what we're trying to do.
And yeah, he's also asked about will there be public access to the hub? And I think you touched on this.
Yeah, so there will be different levels of access depending on, the nature of the project is that we work this out as we go along. So yes, there will be open public access to some aspects of the platform, but other parts might require certain types of subscriptions and registrations and things like that. But that's all to work out as we go along.
Yeah, and then the third part of that is, will it be designed in a way that would suit schools? So both for teaching and learning, and the management of their own infrastructure and resources.
So yeah, we've kind of seen it as something that would be pitched at a whole range of different levels. So, the other tools that we've built in the past have been aimed for kids to get involved in schools and learning resources on there. The idea is that you will be able to upload your own data onto this system, but your own data will be closed off, so no one else would see it unless you made a choice that you wanted to share it. So if you've collected a bit, the kind of citizen science approach. So if some kids have collected some data on, pollution levels around their school or on their journey to school, they could put that into this system, run some analysis on it, but it wouldn't necessarily be fully publicly available. It'd be kind of closed just to their group. Yeah,
I think that might come into actually Joe Ravetz, the fellow speaker, has typed a question in here about if the hub includes for user-generated local level experimental data. So, for example, the Loop 3 experiment on local participative data in the Manchester Urban Observatory. How do you manage issues of quality, security, privacy, and so forth?
Yeah, so we've my default answer to that is that we've appointed a research software engineer who's an expert in security and privacy, who will be helping us with all of that. We've also got a systems architect, we're in the middle of interviewing for that at the moment, who will be, as part of the system architecture plan, will be addressing all those kinds of issues. So because we're at the start, I can't give answers to all of this because we've not done it yet. But they're all there.
There is a
in
process.
The plan. My get out clause.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a few questions as well. I think you talked a little bit, well, you mentioned about an international aspect, because a lot of the data you're talking about is very UK based. Are there plans to use non-UK data in the data hub? So
not initially, but as part of the work, the bit of work that the Connected Places Catapult will be helping us with around business models, part of that is to look at how this could be, so this is a technical term, how this whole thing could be containerized, so packaged up. Imagine like a physical container, but in the virtual world, that container can then be picked up and dropped on into another computing system anywhere in the world. So our infrastructure that we build will then function, and then you'd plug in data from your country. Say, I always use the example of Mexico, because at the time I've just come back from a meeting in Mexico City. So you could potentially have this running for the country of Mexico on our infrastructure, and you just plug in your own data. Now, it's not quite as simple as just plugging it in, but yes, that is part of the plan, linked to business models and how this thing will finance itself, because it will get some core funding, but it will need external funding as well. So there are possibilities of working in other parts of the world. Are other countries doing this? Do you know of other countries that are doing this? Or? So one of the postdocs' jobs will be to do a sort of state-of-the-art review of all this. If we are aware of a system in Australia called UoM, which is actually based at the university, it's half University of Melbourne, half federal government. So there are some examples of similar things. Yeah. And Joe's asked a follow-on question about the management of security and privacy. The follow-on issue is more problematic. For example, where detailed data on flood risk or crime has direct impact on house values, insurance, local perceptions. A problem we have at the moment with the police or security module. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, Joe, or a comment. Well, we're not sort of suddenly springing some data from nowhere that no one's ever really seen before. This is all, most of this kind of data that we're talking about is, apart from the health data, because a lot of that's individual health records that we aggregated up, but a lot of that flood risk data is already available on Environment Agency websites anyway, and there are ways in which you stop it from the caveats around that data of it shouldn't be used for individual level assumptions or so we can address that in about 2 years' time when we've got something up and running. And then we've actually had a few more questions come in. So Isaac from Friends of the Earth Manchester says, I think you mentioned it earlier, but I didn't catch it. What's the best way to get in contact, to get involved in your workshops in the coming months? Yeah, so at the moment, because I've not got a project manager, just email me. You'll regret that soon. Yeah, but we are putting everyone's email address into an Excel file at the moment, but eventually the website, which has only just sort of been put together, it's quite basic, will have a kind of a database on there for people to start registering their interests and things. But at the moment, just drop me an email. Great. And maybe Lauren could put that up in the chat. Sammy from University of Manchester, Al Janabi. Could this tool potentially be used to better assess where to place the next renewable energy facilities? For example, solar farms, wind farms, nuclear reactors, things like that. Could that be an application of the tool? Yes, it could, and we've actually got some stuff we've built in the past that has looked at assessing the potential of brownfield land for renewable energy production. Another work we've done with Scottish and Southern Energy up in Aberdeen, looking at locating of electrolyzers for charging hydrogen buses. So yeah, it's kind of we are responding to what through the user workshops, we'll develop the use cases. I mean, we've got the two use cases, but the idea is the underlying infrastructure, that what we are building has to go beyond the use cases, because this eventually will do lots of things. It's just that we're going with those two to start with, to sort of show that this technically will work, but other use cases will come online as we go forward. That's
actually Gail Millen Chalabi. Sorry, Gail, if I've massacred your name there. She's also from the Geography Department. Said she has, yeah, you mentioned these two case studies planned on climate and health. How many additional case studies do you foresee within the scope of the 4 years of the project?
So we're working, because the Health and Safety Executive are a partner, we're working on something with them. And I kind of alluded to that earlier with the idea of, the example of the oil tanker crashing on the motorway and everything spilling out into the watercourse, and how you respond. So working with the Urban Observatory at Newcastle, who've got expertise in kind of real near-time data flows, how this can react in near real time to some incident happening. But the health and the climate one are very broad. So the climate one is not just about the Climate Just project that me and Sarah Linley have been working on for several years. It's about lots of other stuff. So I use the example of a local authority has to build 3,000 houses over the next 10 years. Where's it going to put them? What are the environmental impacts of that? That's quite a broad generic use case that we will be using as a demonstrator. The health one will range from, I mean, we bid for this before anyone had said the words COVID-19. So the health one originally was all about respiratory illness and environmental factors, but there are other things. Obviously, the pandemic has a role to play on modelling of a pandemic. So there are two broad use cases with lots of case studies within the use cases.
Yeah, so I guess the project's being a bit proactive and kind of giving the sort of case studies, but it'll be room for being reactive as
yeah, and it could be that the climate change case study in Scotland. There might be parts, it might be different to Northern Ireland, Wales, or Southwest England. It will be variable.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. I think we will pass over to Jo. That's been really good. So yeah, if anyone does want to get involved in those workshops, Lauren's put Richard's email on there. You will be added to a database, and they should get in touch with you if you want to be involved in helping shaping this. So thank you very much. And Jo, I will pass over to you. I think you have some slides to share, and you will have about 25 minutes to speak. And then, so if everyone could keep typing in any questions, any comments, that'd be lovely.
Great, thanks, Kate. Thanks, Richard. Very interesting. I presume participants are on the same page now, so thanks. Well, great to talk to everybody here. I think we're on the same page up to now. Now, I went to the COP26 and I found myself a kind of outlaw, because I kept asking these questions that weren't really in the script, either from the panel at the front or from the back of the room, and so on. So partly this is a kind of follow-up to that, and partly also a report on a programme that's been running before and after the COP called Climate Wise, and I'll explain what that means. So I'm going to ask the wrong questions here and then say something about what is a collective climatic intelligence, if such a thing exists, then talk about the toolkit, which is designed to elicit and enable such an intelligence, if that is possible, and then with an example. We also have a couple of tools. There's a 3D hub, very nice. Another time I'll take you on a guided tour. And here is our two-dimensional workspace, which I'll also describe in a bit. That's a link for the hub. And then, by the way, this is where I'm coming from. Now, I am that person on the left. And I worked for years, crunching models, bigger spreadsheets that got bigger and bigger, and so on. And the conclusion was pretty extreme. Yes, we are heading for the end of civilization as we know it, through climate change, biodiversity loss, land use, and so on and so on. So we hand our report to the policymaker, such as he or she may be, and she or he puts it on the shelf because she or he has got other kinds of problems. And I think this is maybe a kind of useful follow-on to Richard's brilliant presentation on the hub, which is to say broadly, how are we going to use this hub? And you'll also gather, I think, in pictures a lot. I was a long time ago an architect. So pictures I find are very useful for this kind of joined up thinking. And here is one about the climate policy cycle. And as you see, urban policy feeds into transport policy, which feeds into energy policy, which then feeds into foreign policy, which then feeds into COP26. And the reality of making things work or not, as the case may be. So, well, here's a commercial plug, but some also background. It started with a city region project, and now it's ended up with a collective intelligence project. And the collective intelligence can be applied to climate, to technologies, to urban planning, to economic development, and so on and so on. It's a kind of general theme. At the moment, it's taking a very interesting turn, I think, by feeding into the kind of existential crisis which we have seen at the COP26, and this is not going to go away anytime soon, I believe. So again, here's just one of a series of cartoon kind of graphic story things that have been, you know, running quietly in the background. Periodically, they sort of surface into a finished chapter or something. And this concerns a bunch of oil and gas rentier capitalists, so to say, location unknown, but they have been infiltrated by so-called ghosts or activists under the table. And this is their kind of conversation. Now, I did work in Qatar, amongst other places, on the low carbon transition of Qatar. And you might know that Qatar is the world's third or second largest producer of oil and gas, the largest reserves of oil and gas. So the whole place lives and breathes oil and gas in a sense. And oil and gas is the reason for being there, and the reason that the ruling family is, you know, insanely rich and plans to continue being that way. So the message here is to say, yes, of course, all these people came to the COP26, and it's not to say that they don't believe in climate change. Maybe they do, or maybe, but also they've got other agendas. So my personal feeling was, and that, you know, an increasing number of people have said, yeah, we have to start to understand more systematically and seriously, what are these other agendas? How do they work? How do they interface with the scientific and technical consensus on, you know, climate change is very bad and we have to all change our ways and, you know, rewire our entire system and so on. Other people see it differently. So how does that work? Well, we began to distill some structural features, and it concerns, yes, climate change is embedded and entangled with conflicts and divisions in other systems, social, economic, political, cultural. It's a long list. And it's so both a technical, scientific single issue, but it also involves the transformation, either unplanned and unwanted and disastrous, or planned and intentional and hopefully strategic of such systems, social, economic, political, infrastructural, and so on. Whether it's a single issue or whether it's deeply entangled, you could say, well, that's a political issue, but it is also contested as depolitical. People in our school here, SEED, are deeply, you know, involved in the depolitical debate or depoliticization and so on. So if we get beyond this climate as a single issue policy, well, we have to talk about dialogue, learning, collective innovation, and collective collaboration, and so on and so on. There is no fixed answer out there. It now transpires. But of course, this dialogue and learning all sounds nice, but it's challenged by the making of money and power, ideology, and other kinds of value. And we began to chart out a kind of map where climate policy is hijacked, diverted, or blocked. And these are then the wrong questions which were being asked at the COP26. What could possibly go wrong with climate as a single issue? how do we make money or power if we assume we are like the rentiers of the Gulf or land speculators in South Asia, or foresters in Brazil, for example, or simply people in Manchester who just want to live their life. And yes, climate change could be a problem, but it's not really my problem right now today, and so on. I speak as one who drove my diesel camper van to the COP26 with a tent in the back. So how does that work? Well, up for debate. So this is then a kind of map of possibilities, like almost a scenario map, but this is more like a sort of mindscape map. Climate is a single issue. Technical actions lack connection to socio-political agendas. You could put the UK's experience of net zero so far into that bracket. We've had two major programs on housing retrofit in the last 10 years, both of them abject failures. I was involved in both of them in some way. So you might say, oh, did the government learn from this? Nope. Why not? Well, because they had other things on their mind. And what might those things be? Well, then you say, okay, maybe it would work better if the climate policy served some other end, like making money, for example, or consolidating the power of elites, maybe, and so on. Now, of course, each of those is a long, long story. We could also say, oh, if we are like the rentiers of the Gulf, for example, well, we might or might not go along with the COP26, commitments, but actually the primary object is to maintain power and wealth. And if that is better served by climate blockage, or let's say, delay and distraction and a whole load of words beginning with D, then yes, that's what's going to happen. And finally, they might say, oh, well, we can only stay in power as long as at least some of the people are happy for at least most of the time. And this is, the kind of message to most oligarchs and dictators around the world. So yes, keep the people happy with cheap energy and cheap goods, which fill the shopping malls. And this is the story of the Gulf, where we're still working, actually. Only if many conditions are satisfied can we then get to this hallowed land of climate wise, where, yes, we can bring climate change into alignment with all of the other agendas, social change, political change, cultural change. My problem is I can't see that happening very, very soon. Certainly not within 5 years or 10 years, which is what the scientists tell us is absolutely essential. So yeah, guys, we have a problem. As to how that problem might then be taken forward and mapped out, well, here you see a little clip from Glasgow, the demonstration outside of Morgan Chase. The first peoples of the world accused Morgan Chase of being involved in blood money, simply because their people are being killed and dispossessed by projects funded by Morgan Chase. So you track that out and say, oh, okay. And this was like a thought experiment done in Glasgow, and then which has been followed up since. And there are political challenges and syndromes, social, economic, urban, rural, technological, and of course, psychological, cultural. And to take one at random, well, we've got a mythology of growth and affluence. People around the world, I think the vast majority, still want more stuff, bigger cars, more holidays, bigger houses, and so on and so on, more shopping. And this is a real problem. And you could go right around this circle and say, oh, from the surveys that we did in Glasgow, with a whole load of these little diagrams printed out and put to interview, these things kind of came to the fore. It was not possible to do a sample of hundreds or thousands, but these were the things which kind of came up from a straw poll as being the priorities. So we took that on board. Well, then we could also then get into some local details. So, oh, okay, what about urban transport? There's a thing which is very important for climate change policy. Yes, in this country, there was a policy to phase out petrol and diesel, fossil fuel vehicles, but that's going to really take quite a long time, all the way to 2050, and other stuff might happen. And in the other parts of the world, people are just buying cars as fast as they can. So let's have a low traffic neighborhood. Well, you can see in the little picture, this is not universally popular. Why should this be? Well, because again, we can start to track some of the effects which just, come up to the surface. So yeah, there's outrage, protest, fuel price rises, divisions exploited by populists, backlashes against public transport, eco-gentrification raises prices. As soon as you, and this all came to a head in an area not far from here in South Manchester, just a year ago, I think. And some people said, well, low traffic neighbourhoods. So that's keeping the middle class nicely in their, rising house values, while poor people are squeezed out to line the main roads and, suffering noise and pollution and so on. Now, of course, real life is never quite so simple, but this was a very strong perceived effect. So we could say, well, my goodness, the situation, given all that, might appear almost impossible. What's to do? Well, here's one kind of response. Now here, I turn to my friends at that radical frontline organization called McKinsey and Company. And they did a very nice thing, which we happened to, suited our purpose, so we used it. And they talk about 9 requirements for orderly transition to net zero. Some of you in the audience will be experts on this, so I bow down to that. But this is the McKinsey analysis. And these are the structural challenges which they put up. Now, in the literature, well, there's thousands of papers and books and learned conferences on each of these things. The problem of collective action, the problem of investment hurdles, the problem of time preference, and so on and so on. Nothing new here. But then if you apply that to these system conditions, so-called physical, economic and social, and governance, you say, oh, okay, well, starting at number 1, well, yeah, technological innovation, it seems to work pretty well, but it's actually quite political, doesn't always go to plan. Who's to do it? Private sector, the public sector, and so on and so on. That should not be an impossible problem. And then we get to number 3, availability of necessary natural resources. Oh, okay. If we follow through the net zero commitments from governments, oh, we're going to take half of the agricultural land in the world and put it into carbon storage, and then have a international market which speculates on the value of those carbon offsets and so on. Not necessarily great for the local people and indigenous people who live there. And then we get all the way down to the list and say, well, commitment and collaboration amongst public, private and social sector leaders globally. Oh, okay, that should be simple, and so on and so on. So what we did then, well, we track that to the system of collective intelligence analysis, which had been previously evolved over a period of about 15 years now. And we look at different points of the spectrum through this lens. We say, oh, if you've got a linear system, then a city, for example, is like an industrial thing. The concrete and steel comes in, and there you've got a city, and that provides so many units of accommodation, and so on. If you regard it as an evolutionary system, one which is continuously evolving and changing and innovating and so on, that's great. But you tend to find, oh, the city becomes like a machine for making money for the rich and squeezing out the poor, and so on, as we see in Manchester and many other places. So is there a third version? Is there a co-evolutionary alternative, which is multi-use human scale, which is reciprocal, participative, inclusive, and so on and so on? So we use that general kind of approach, 1, 2, 3, evolutionary and co-evolutionary, to track right through the cycle. And we can then bring this back to the McKinsey system conditions and say, oh, okay, to answer these conditions, and of course, the most clear and effective way you get to the political at the bottom of this picture, difference between a hierarchy, dictatorship, and a co-governance by and for the community on the right. We take these back to the system conditions and they say, okay, here they are on the left. Here are the common syndromes associated with each of these system conditions. And here are the common modes of response, either 1 and 2, in other words, evolutionary, which leads directly into extraction, hijack, exclusion, and so on, and the possibility of a mode 3. So this is where the collective climatic intelligence is then focused. Yes, the mode 3, the co-evolutionary version, is where we want to focus our attention. Well, how to do that? First thing is you get the actors around the table, and I'll finish in about 5 minutes, okay? And we track who is doing what and what are the relations of power and dependency and all those nasty things around the table. You don't have to look very far to find those things in one of our workshops at least. And then you say, oh, okay, would it be possible to look for synergies? If people took the longer view and the bigger picture and they said, well, maybe I don't need to, maybe it's not a zero-sum game. Maybe if I could collaborate with those guys over there, good things might come of it. So we start to draw the patterns of possible synergy all around the table. And then say, oh, okay, each one of those possible loops and patterns of synergy with different combinations of actors around the table, this then constitutes a pathway, so-called. We can then start to label these pathways: democracy, livelihood, community, and so on and so on. So that's the general approach. Using that general approach for a toolkit, well, the toolkit is basically not, you know, press the button and here's the answer, almost the opposite. Again, we say, oh, okay, could we use this for any kind of purpose, or is it all about climate? Well, the point is here, we put climate in the center, but having said what we already saw about climate hijack, climate diversion, and so on, we say, well, this is not all about climate. It might be about food, or about buildings, or about transport, or about you know, technology, and so on. So we keep these interfaces in mind, and that is then the key to at least imagining the possibility of real synergies. And this is the kind of, you know, generic diagram for how those might work, with a little sort of city in the background, as you can see. And then we take it into a process mode. This is the cartoon version of a process, and it's really quite simple in principle. First, we say what's the problem, what's going on here, who is involved. Then we look at the future. If possible, we draw lots of pictures, which is my favorite thing. We get specialists on board. And then the most important, we look for the synergies around the table. And if we can identify the synergies, this does not always happen, you know, in half an hour, then we say, oh, how do we turn these into real things, strategies in the real world? So that's the 4S system. And we say, well, before we set up, you know, what's it cost? Who are the users? What is their agenda? What time is lunch? How much does it cost? But also we say, what are we really trying to do here? Is it about direct problems? Is it about evolutionary stuff, innovation, etc.? Or is it about co-evolutionary stuff, transformation, etc.? So that's a general model. And then we turn it into a whole set of visual templates, which look more or less like that. This is a tool kit. You don't necessarily start at number 1, 2, 3, 4, just as if you've got a builder's toolkit. You don't use the tools in one set order, obviously. But this is a toolkit which we draw on. And then this toolkit at the moment is turned into an online workspace, which here's one example, which we're using in our global urban project called Periscene. And you can see there's quite a lot going on because, yes, it's a big workspace. It's like a kind of big workshop, you know, if each table has, you know, a city on it, and then there's a zone in the middle in the blue where, you know, we look for common insights, and it does get quite messy. This was done after 4 half-day sessions last year, all online. Of course, we set up the project expecting and wanting to work face-to-face and pay a lot of money for airfares and hotels for these people to come. That was not possible, so we had to do it all online, which is actually a major challenge. Easier in some ways to get people without, you know, burning up CO2, but more difficult to get people's full attention and commitment, and particularly creative thinking. But, you know, we have evolved some ways of doing this, and I think this experience is useful to others. So you can see there's a whole set of templates here, which you can then see in this example. So here's the section of that table concerned with Manchester. As you can see, we bring in other material like maps and the templates down the left-hand side. Broadly, the thing in the big circle follows more or less, it follows that logic of 1, 2, 3, 4 stages with some variations. And then we've got other tools, other templates which come in from the side. And then you can start to do some really good creative thinking. And here's some stuff coming up on the scenario mapping and futures theme. And there's some stuff coming up on the mapping of different actors in the synergistic way, which is saying, we don't only have a list of actors, we have the beginning of a map of synergies. How do they cooperate and collaborate and learn and so on for this transformation which we're all wanting to achieve. We can even talk about the structure of the city region in space, what's in the center, what's on the periphery, and so on, or we can talk about different patterns of governance, and so on and so on. It's very flexible, very open-ended. And that's the real place that we're dealing with, the South Pennines, in this particular example, not far from here. And then to say, oh, okay.
Just a minute or two more, Joe, is that okay?
Yeah, 2 minutes, sure. These are the examples that come up from the South Pennines. We can map the factors, in other words, what causes what in 4 different categories. We can map who is doing what and why are things all messed up. And these are some of the syndromes which come out. This is the summary version, obviously. You can read our reports for the full thing. And then we say, okay, what about the synergies? Is it possible to work through this process and identify ways forward, which are not only there sort of written on paper or in a policy document, they suit the values and interests of different groups of people around that table. And this is the key to making it work. So this is the example of the synergies. And then also we use scenarios quite a bit. These are from the official SSP scenarios, so-called. And then we map the pathways from the gaps to the pathways for 3 or 4 main versions. And of course, each one of these can then be turned into a roadmap or a strategy of some kind, depending on resources and timing and so on and so on. So the whole thing really is building that intelligence and applying the intelligence, not as an abstract thing, but as a very real thing. This is about real collaboration with real people in real time. And yes, we are continuing to learn all the time. There is a so-called collaboratorium with 3 programs, ClimateWise being one of them. We have a little bit of sponsorship so far, looking for more. There are bi-monthly open forums. You're all invited. If you let me know where you are by email, great. I'll keep you in touch. We will open a community network listserv shortly, and hopefully a new platform. And there are calls for papers and conference roundtables and so on and so on. Got 3 live projects at the moment and a couple more on the way. So that's really all I need to say. Big thanks, and I hope to see you in one of our events, if not online, then face-to-face even. So great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think you've given us a snapshot of what is a very detailed and in-depth process. So that's been really nice to see. If people want to type their questions, I have a few that I'd like to start with. So yeah, you talk about, get people at the table, you map the syndromes, you map the synergies working together. At what level is it that you are getting people together in a room? So I guess I'm thinking here, is it people in an organization, or do you get people together across a supply chain, for example, that might connect those different levels? And the same, do you get people at local government levels together with national government to try and think about how these processes and synergies need to happen at different levels and at different scales?
Good question.
Sorry, I've not started with the easiest.
And the answer is yes, and in a sense. wherever the locus of interest is, and depending on, you know, resources and time and so on, then yes, you might look at a supply chain, you might look at a particular place, you might look at one organization or a whole bunch of organizations. Our sort of showcase at the moment is transforming food systems in Wales. This is for Natural Resources Wales. And you might know, well, Richard will know, he's one of his partners. You know, NRW has huge amounts of data, but you know, what to do with it? Who's going to use this? What, you know, and so on. So we're trying to, run with that data, but also more importantly, run with the people involved in the food systems of Wales. So that's farmers, lobby groups, policy, landowners, consumers, supermarkets, and so on, bringing all those people together to say, oh, okay, things at the moment are really all messed up for a whole variety of reasons. Here and there are wonderful examples of, you know, sustainable food production or, you know, natural, you know, healthy eating and so on. And these are very, you know, inspirational, but they don't scale up usually. How do we scale these up and reach, you know, the whole nation? So the short answer to your question is, yes, we're working at supply chains with local versus national and, you know, multi-sectoral groups and so on, yeah.
Yeah. And do you have, will you be bringing together this, so I guess, well, this collective climate intelligence, you are, I guess, building as you go along. So you build it, as I understand it, in a workshop, but actually you're building more as you do more workshops. And do you have plans or a way in which to bring that data together from different perspectives, different sectors, in any way?
As far as possible, and well, I started my career in the last century as a community planner and architect, and I began to realise, well, do you know what? You have these really conflicted, controversial development situations. Let's get people around the table in a room, and of course, then you find out, oh, the people who really should be there are not there. They're not going to turn up. In other words, the distant financiers, the corporate landowners based in the Cayman Islands. And the designers who might be based in New York and so on. So you do what you can. Now, when I say workshop and there's a cartoon of, you know, everybody in the same room kind of thing, well, that's the cartoon version. The reality is probably more like, in most cases, yeah, you have a workshop here, you have a bunch of interviews there, you have to do some investigative journalism and doorstep, you know, the financier in the Cayman Islands, if you can, and so on and so on. So it's a how do you say, mixed method approach. But if you have an idea what you're trying to achieve, then all of that is quite doable. And the big divide for us was then online versus on-site, as I mentioned, and the COVID kind of, you know, knocked all of our plans off. I'm sure, well, most people here, I'm sure, had a similar thing. But, you know, interviews and meetings were suddenly, you know, out, everything online. So it actually caused a kind of revolution, which is to say, well, okay, things are more difficult online, but in other cases, they're easier because you don't have to get on a plane to Shanghai and you'll burn up all that carbon and very expensive and so on. Everybody is now doing it online. So we're still, I think, real beginners at, you know, the best way to do that. And it changes daily, I think.
And I have one final question for you, and then we will wrap up. This is what happens at the end. So once you've gone into a the Wales Food Project. What happens when you go away? Is everyone in synergy? What happens at that point?
Well, yeah, having, you know, saved the world, you know,
yeah, your job is done.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work like that. I think ideally, and this, well, it's explained actually in my book if anyone wants to check it out, that there is then a longer term or a permanent collaboratorium model, which is to say, oh, okay, you know, you can hire some researchers or consultants, they'll come in for a few months or a couple of years at most and do this and that, and then, you know, they have to go away. But what happens, you know, are the food systems of Wales suddenly all sustainable? Well, probably not. It's a process. It will take forever, actually, you know. So let's make sure that process has enough resources and, you know, techniques to carry on. It has credibility with the government, who is hopefully paying for it, at least in some part, and the corporates and the civic society and everybody involved, to say, yeah, this is a really good thing to do. Let's keep it going. Let's have, quarterly meetings and a bunch of researchers or, promoters, facilitators rather, who can keep that thing going and periodically cycle around the whole of the food system. And if anyone here has worked with food systems, well, just like any other system, massively complex and goes all over the place, and it doesn't all hang together in one piece. It's rather to say, yeah, it's a system of systems, meaning, yeah, here's your consumption thing, here's your production thing, here's your land use thing, and climate change, emissions, and so on and so on. So these are not all going to gel on one day in some perfect, master plan. So we keep alive the notion that, yeah, this is a continuous process. And if we know what we're aiming for, then actually we can facilitate that to be much more intelligent and useful than otherwise. And some people say, what is this collective climate intelligence? What on earth is that? And I say, well, it's the opposite of collective climatic stupidity, which is more or less, you can see it all around. Anyway, so leave it there.
Yeah. No, because I guess if the process doesn't continue, we probably lose the collective climate intelligence, or at risk of losing it. So yeah, thanks. And I should say as well that you've got some comments, thank you comments, and people have really enjoyed seeing what possibilities this has. So oh, and then Richard has just posted a database set up here to register your interest in the hub. So there's, if everyone, there's some links up there that people have put up from stuff covered in the session. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Richard and Joel for those really interesting talks. And yeah, if you signed up to the event, Lauren will probably, I think you were sending some follow-up emails with some future, we have a Sustainable Futures seminar every month. So you will be informed of those coming up. But so thank you very much. And thank you to our speakers. So it's been really enjoyable.
Good to talk. Thanks.